You know, one of the advantages of being an older guy like myself, right? I'm 51. An advantage is that you have seen a lot and you grew up in a different time. I'm 51, which means that I've been an adult for 30 years. Yeah. And I was paying attention to my environment, my zeitgeist, you know, the cultural times, if you will, since the time I was, I don't know, maybe, 12, 13, that I was paying attention to things going on in the wider world. Yeah. And that gives you a huge advantage. And it's something that young men, because they're young, because, a young guy who's like 20, 25 maybe, he can't see the perspective that I have. And so a young guy looking at the world today thinks that what's going on now is normal. But I'm here to tell you that the world that's going on right now, it's not normal. It's not even close to normal. Now, what do I mean by things aren't normal? What am I referring to specifically that is abnormal? Well, it's simplicity itself. I'm talking about the cultural divide, the polarization that's going on, the sense that there is an us and a them. Okay, this is new. This is new. Before, in the Western democracies, there was a greater sense that we were all in the same boat. And my thinking is that it was because when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, we had the Soviet Union and the countries of the Warsaw Pact as our obvious adversaries. Now, this was a counterweight to our society that allowed us to coalesce as a group. There were, of course, people on the left and people on the right, but what happened was that we were all together on the same boat because we had this common enemy, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was, at the time, perceived as a real threat, a threat that could actually do harm to us, because it was in the cards. And on more than one occasion, the countries of the Western democracies and the countries of the Warsaw Pact, NATO and Warsaw Pact nations, almost came to war over Cuba, over Korea. There were some issues during Vietnam where it got kind of dicey. Yeah. And if you think about it, all these wars, Korea, Vietnam, El Salvador, Nicaragua, they were all like proxy battles of this larger war. Afghanistan, back in the 80s, before the United States went there, they were all these little proxy wars for the great game that was going on between the Western democracies and the Eastern European countries under the yoke of the Soviet Union. And because of that, we were all on the same boat. We believed that our destiny was common and that we had to work together. And that doesn't exist anymore. When was it? In 1991, when the Soviet Union ultimately collapsed, right? In the afterglow of that victory, because it was a tremendous victory, it was a victory over one of the most malevolent empires in world history that happened without a war. Remarkable, yeah? And brilliant. And George Kennan, who created the policy of containment, he should be right up there on Mount Rushmore. I mean, that's the kind of credit that the man deserves. But another conversation. The point is, the afterglow of this victory lasted for, about a decade and a half, maybe. Well, it encompassed, the 2001 terrorist attack, 9/11. Now, that attack briefly was the last spurt of this sense of common ground. But then there was the whole Iraq war, which was stupid and maliciously driven and pointless. And that's when the fissures really started to appear. And it wasn't really the anti-war camp versus the pro-war camp. No, it was underground that has emerged with Trump. It was the sense of, the people who are well off, the oligarchy, the top 20%, and the rest of the population. That's the divide that we're seeing. Okay, there are other things going on that seem to be like more important, feminism and migration and this, that, the other. No. But ultimately, what's really going on is class warfare, which didn't exist in the Western democracies before. Because you see, the top 20% of the population, yeah, they are, think of them as the service class of the 1% of the 1%. The top echelon, the top sliver, at the very top of the Western democracies, the rich people, right? The oligarchs, the people who have, a net worth of over $2-3 million, right? That sliver at the very top, they have a service class of the top 20%. Now, when I say a service class, it's the people that you would envision. It's like the accountants, the doctors, the lawyers, you know, the yoga instructors, and all these peripheral people that service that top class. Now, those people's interests, the top 20% band, right? Now, those people's interests and the interests of the bottom 80% of the population diverged quite some time ago. Now, this wasn't always the case, because during the Cold War, the battle with the Soviet Union that never escalated into full-on war, thank God, well, during the Cold War, the top 20% could not isolate itself from the bottom 80%. Because if the nukes fell from the, you know, if they were lobbed over from the Soviet side onto the Western democracy side, the nuclear bomb was going to kill everybody, be they top 20% or bottom 80%. Everybody was going to get nuked, right? So everybody's interests were aligned, the top and the bottom. We were all in the same boat. But with the end of the Cold War, that's when the oligarchs, the top, started to profiteer, quite frankly. Now, what do I mean by profiteering? They implemented this neoliberal, rapacious capitalism that all it cared about was money, making as much money as possible. And there was no sense of a shared or common destiny with all people. During the Cold War, we had that sense. We had that sense that we're all in it together. And if things go south, you know, we're all going to suffer equally. But after the end of the Cold War, with the threat of a nuclear war no longer in the cards, I mean, even communist China was, though still communist, was actually going capitalist and making money. And they were more interested in making money than having a nuclear war. Well, you know, everybody was on the same page globally insofar as making money, and making money became the ultimate end in itself. There was no sense of shared national purpose, of national unity. It became an issue of, you know, everybody is out to make the best for themselves, and, you know, the devil take the hindmost. And so what happened was that the top 20% started implementing this rapacious capitalism, this neoliberal paradigm of globalism that relentlessly sought lower labor costs and higher profitability to the detriment of the society. And we saw we've seen the lower 80% suffer because of this rapacious neoliberalism. And that's the fissure. That's what's going on. Now, this notion that we were all in the same boat, that we're all unified during the Cold War, many other people have said it because it's true. You know, I mean, when a bunch of people say the same fucking thing, it's probably because it's true. You know, we all say that the sky is blue. Odds are good that, you guessed it, the sky is blue. Well, that kind of national unity, it's not coming back, although people have tried to create some sort of ersatz version of it. And that's part of the reason for this drive to vilify Russia. Russia is an economy the size of Italy's, okay? And they are not these super spy masterminds. I mean, no, it's not true that they manipulated any fucking shit. The fact of the matter is, a lot of people in the Western democracies miss the Cold War. And they want to replicate it. And they have tried to designate modern-day Russia, which is far from the Soviet Union. They have tried to replicate modern-day Russia as the enemy, the designated enemy to unify us. That was part of the point. The political program of demonizing Russia, it was to recreate that sense of national unity. Which, if you think about it, number one, it's fucking crazy, but number two, it makes a kind of sense. I mean, all craziness ultimately has a certain kind of logic to it. And there was a certain kind of logic in trying to demonize Russia and make Russia be the enemy once again. It was to recreate this sense, because without this sense, we are directionless. And that's the problem. Because you got to keep in mind that between 1945, when people were already realizing, as the Second World War was closing, that the next enemy was Soviet Russia, right? Since 45 up until 1991, practically 2 full generations of people in the Western democracies grew up with this weight, this counterbalance, this pressure that made us feel united. And it's been a little over a generation, about 30 years now, where we no longer have this common purpose, and we are attacking one another, and we are polarized between that 20% and their allied interests, which include feminists, which include the gay and lesbian groups, which include the mass migrants, both the Hispanics in the United States and the Muslims in the UK. Yeah, we have that group shaped like an L, and the bottom 80%, and they're at loggerheads. And what's happening is that this political divide, this political polarization between these two camps, it's becoming more and more obvious. That is, both sides are starting to accrete at the extremes. And we're seeing this on the left now, aren't we? The left is becoming militant. People on the left are not only not vilifying Antifa, they are actively encouraging them. And Antifa is growing in numbers. It's a very, very dangerous thing. When you start to have left-wing, extreme left-wing paramilitary groups running around without any kind of control, and the police actively told not to touch Antifa, as is happening today. It's happening in the West Coast, certainly Portland and Seattle. We've seen that already. Well, when you start to see that kind of political polarization, and you start to see how left-wing paramilitary groups are running around without any kind of control, then you start to realize that it's not going to be long before a right-wing paramilitary group starts to rise to combat the left-wing paramilitary group. And what's that? That's the precursor to a civil war. See what I mean? You're a young guy, right? And you're watching the world around you. And understand this is not normal. There was no such thing as any kind of paramilitary group like Antifa running around back in the 70s or the 80s. Yeah, back in the 60s, there were a few crazies, but they were crazies. And they were actively suppressed by everybody, left, right, and center. Okay? I can think of like the Black Panthers, because today the Black Panthers are sort of like lionized, but back in the day, everybody, again, right, center, and left, hated them and actively tried to suppress them, okay? Because they were terrorists, for crying out loud. And there were other crazy-ass groups, the Baader-Meinhof gang in Germany, and anyway, it doesn't really matter, you can look them up. There were a whole bunch of terrorist groups that were just filled with crazy people, okay? And they were suppressed by the wider population. A democratically elected mayor would have sent his cops out to stop the Black Panthers, as they did tons of times, okay? But now that's not happening. Now you have mayors, left-wing mayors, who are telling their cops to stand down and let Antifa have their way. That is fucking crazy. That's not fucking normal. And so I'm telling you, these are not normal times, and they're going to get worse. They're going to get worse because eventually the right is going to take up arms. Yeah. And to tell you the truth, it makes sense for a lot of politicians and what have you to try to suppress the right at this time, suppress the more virulent, the more on-point right-wing people, especially the smarter right-wing people. Because if you notice that who they're really suppressing are not these, white trash people who are out in fucking Appalachia or wherever the fuck running around with guns and white bed sheets on their heads. No, they're not suppressing those fuckers who are morons. No, they're suppressing the smart ones. They're suppressing the ones who have rational reasons for their ideas. They're suppressing YouTube channels. Last week there was the suppression of the Iconoclast channel, right? Yeah, this kind of stuff that's going on, the suppression of right-wing ideas, right-wing views, is because people sort of like sense what's coming, okay? And right now they are using the tools at their disposal, which is censorship. But pretty soon it's going to be violence, and it's going to be violence in both directions. What I'm saying is basically that we're headed for a civil war, okay? And this is just another approach to look at the problem, but the problem remains the same. We're headed for a civil war. We're headed for a civil war that's going to rip the Western democracies to tatters. And the outcome is totally unclear. A lot of people on the right foolishly think that, oh, you know, the left don't know how to shoot a weapon. Well, yeah, but you know, the left, they tend to be pretty smart, and it's not that fucking hard to shoot a weapon. You know, you can learn how to shoot a weapon in about, I don't know, half an hour. Okay, so this notion that the right is automatically going to win a civil war, that's just dumb, and it's foolhardy. There have been a lot of civil wars where the left has won, and has won incredible victories against astonishing odds. Look at the Russian Civil War. The Bolsheviks should have lost. You look at it on paper, and they should have lost. Look at Vietnam. The Vietnamese Civil War, which is what the Vietnam War actually was. Well, the North, the communists, they won. And they won against the largest, most powerful military in human history. So fuck you that the left don't know how to win a civil war. Fucking A, they do know how to win a civil war. So it's not clear that the right will win the coming civil war in the Western democracies. Now, why am I doing this video? Well, very simple. You got to keep your eyes open. You got to understand that what we are going through, what we are experiencing culturally and politically, not only is it not normal, it's the precursor to something horrible, okay? Because a civil war, by definition, is fucking horrible. And the bloodiest wars are between brothers, okay? Civil wars are always the nastiest in every sense, the bloodiest, with the most atrocities, the most horrifying things happen during civil wars, okay? And if there's going to be a civil war in the Western democracies, which I am convinced that there is going to be, we're going to see the escalation of violence, the escalation of atrocities, and I, for one, don't think that there's any way to avert it anymore. I think that that day is past. The only possibility, and I'm not holding any real hope for this, but the only possibility is when the left loses the election of 2020, which they will, and they're going to lose huge, okay? If the left wakes up and realizes that their political direction leads to insanity and civil war, if they wake up somehow and realize that they have to adjust, then maybe the civil war will be averted. But I'm not holding up any hope for that. Oh, because of Donald Trump, because of he's such a polarizing figure. I think that the loss in 2020 will send the left so far over the edge that they're going to say that the only way to save the United States is not via the democratic route of elections, but by violence, by civil war. That you cannot save America because America is racist, and all the people who voted for Trump, the majority, are racists, and therefore they have to be destroyed. That is what I'm terrified is going to happen, and unfortunately, that's what I think is going to happen. And, you know, I just hope I'm wrong.